What's up guys, Barry here, Beats for Her, and in today's video we're going to be building out a finger drumming routine. So we're going to look at setting up your drums, chopping and organizing your sample, and laying out your pads so you can effectively and efficiently perform your beats out live, whether it be on the Micro, MK2, MK3, or the Plus. I got you in this video. By the way guys, down in the description you'll find timestamps to each of these sections. Alright, so let's start off with the drums. So I always have my kick, snare, and hi-hat on pads 1, 2, and 3, followed by an open hat on 4, and some additional percussions on the right side if there's room. If I have a crash, it tends to be above my kick drum because it always falls on the 1. So you're going to notice that there's not a lot of processing that happens on my drums outside of the EQ on my kick. I just want to emphasize the importance of sound selection, layering if you do decide to layer, and most importantly, your mix. So inside of Maschine, there's a couple ways to layer your sounds. Here we're going to layer our drums using the zone function. So you can either hit the wave icon on the software or hit sampling on the hardware, followed by zone. So here you'll see that I have 2 kick samples on my 1 kick pad. You can hit play to audition each single sound, and you'll see here on my hi-hat there's only that 1 sample. So let's say we want to add an additional sound onto our 1 drum pad. You're going to hit add. That's going to bring up your browser window. You can sort through your library, and you're just going to hit load when you find a sound that you want to add. So we add the synth sound, and you'll see as we hit that kick drum pad, we're also now triggering the synth sound. So down on the bottom of your zone window, you'll be able to find a section where you can adjust things like your volume or your pitch. If you want to navigate to those functions on your hardware, you're going to hit right arrow and you'll be able to adjust accordingly on the hardware as well. Now this is a very powerful technique. For example, if you want to add a bass sound to your sample or any sound to your sample or your drums, this is how you're going to do it, through zone. Just to quickly show you guys how to do it through the software, you're going to hit the magnifying glass. You're going to find one shots. So just navigate to your one shots menu across the top of your library. You can go ahead and select your sound, and it's just easy as a drag and drop onto your zone section. Quick little shortcut tip, Shift Pad 1 will allow you to undo any of your previous actions. So moving on to my snare sound, you'll see that I have 3 different layers going on here. And again, no additional layers for my hi-hats or my crash. Now a very powerful tool and function that you want to utilize when creating a routine is utilizing choke groups. So if you want to set it up on the hardware, you're going to select the pad that you want to affect. You're going to go into pad mode. Knob number 1 is going to allow you to select the group that you want it to be in. And knob number 2 is going to allow you to select whether that pad is going to send or receive. So in this scenario, pad number 3, my closed hi-hat, is sending to pad number 4, my open hi-hat. And if you want to do this on the software, underneath your group name in the middle, just hit that square and that'll navigate you to the choke groups, and you can organize and arrange your choke groups accordingly. So like I said, this is a very powerful tool to utilize because it gives you the peace of mind to know that your sounds are not going to overlap when you don't want them to. Okay, so on to performing your drums. So that's with fixed velocity on, and this is with fixed velocity off. So both have their pros and cons, but as you see with fixed velocity off, you get a little bit more dynamic range and you get a little bit more humanized with your performance and the way that your sounds are coming out of the machine. So going to the very end of your sampler, you're going to find your velocity destination. So at 100% volume, you're going to have your softest touch to loudest touch, and the opposite if you're going from -100 to 0. 0 being no difference between velocity and volume. So for me, I don't have one set number where my kick, snare, hi-hat is all the same. Just played by ear, played by touch. It's even my opinion that each sample will sound different based on how you set the velocity. And if you want to take that human touch up a little bit further, you can adjust the pitch destination for your sample. And the idea behind this is to mimic the way a percussionist would strike his instrument and get a different resulting sound every time he hits it. Okay, so to use this as a segue to our sample, we'll just quickly look at the EQ for the kick drum. So you'll see that there's a 2 dB boost at around 76 Hertz. Now this isn't something that I really needed to do, but as we look at the sample, you'll kind of understand why that boost and why this EQ is there. So quick tip, on the top right, so pad 16, I always like to have a fresh copy of the sample just in case I need it for future reference. So in this video, I don't particularly cover how to chop samples. There's a card at the top to a video I recently made entitled 4 Ways to Chop Samples in Maschine. Check that out if you need a refresher. So for this sample, I just wanted to play the sample in quarter notes. So I opted to use split mode and I chopped the sample up into 16 equal parts. So to minimize CPU usage and me knowing that I want to play it on pad mode, I just simply apply that one sample onto one pad. But that there is keyboard mode. I need it to be on one pad. So we're going to duplicate that into an empty group. So group F on pad 5, because we know 1, 2, 3, 4, we're going to save for our drums. Okay, so before copying the sample onto your other pads, you want to check 2 things. You want to make sure it's still polyphony 1, and you want to make sure it's in a fresh group. So in this case, we're going to have it in group 1, and you're going to set it as a send. So at this point, you want to be able to perform your pads similar to a keyboard. So in pad mode, on the top right, you're going to see semitone minus and semitone plus. All you have to do is go to your respective pad and adjust your semitones accordingly to the sample that you want to play. And if you're opting to use the software, you can change the key of the pad to represent the desired sample that you want to trigger. So earlier I said we're going to use a kick drum as a segue to the sample. This is probably the most technical aspect of this project, but I'll do my best to explain it. So basically, I have each sample pad getting rerouted to group F, which is now my sample bus. So as a sample plays, you'll notice no sound coming from the different groups. Instead, you'll see it all coming from group F. With that said, the drum's output remains unchanged. Now, it is worth noting that you need to have something on that pad that you want to reroute to. So whether it be a compressor, some reverb, a delay, or in this case an EQ, there needs to be something there. So on the hardware, you can select macro, or on the software, next to master, you'll hit that circle icon, followed by output, and above DST, or destination, you'll have a drop-down menu where you'll be able to select where you want your sound to get routed to. Now, this is the exact same process as setting up an auxiliary bus. That's a topic I'll cover in another video, but for this scenario, I went this route because I only wanted one source sound. So as you see me hit pad 1 in group F, there's no sound actually getting triggered. Now, through using this bus technique, I only have the one plugin to affect all of my sample pads versus having a plugin per pad, therefore effectively minimizing your CPU usage. Now to draw in some MIDI notes on my sample as well as my kick to show you guys what the EQ is doing. So to go back to the kick drum and why I had the EQ on it, despite me saying I didn't really need it, I just used it as a tool to find where my frequencies were for the kick, so I can turn it upside down and use it as a sidechain on my sample, which results in more clarity and definition in the kick drum because the sample is now ducking down and giving the kick a little bit more opportunity to do its thing on the lower end. So if that's a topic you want me to cover in a future video, please let me know in the comments below. Okay, so now on to the groups. With the majority of my sample-based productions, I tend to always have the sample as the intro. So here, I'm using a speaker simulator by Noise Ash to create that vintage, old, crackly radio feel. There's also a flanger on it to give it a little bit more movement and modulation, just to give it a little bit more interest for the introduction. So moving on to group B, here's where our beat kicks in. So our drums and our sample. Now with the sample for this section, I wanted to emphasize the vocal chops. So I take beats 1 and 2 of each measure to create the pattern for this section. Group C will be a continuation of that, where we use the same drums, with the exception of the open hat, which is now a perk. And to create variety, but still keep it familiar, we now use beats 3 and 4 of each measure to, again, create that variation of the beat. So this pad here, pad number 12, I have it set for the same sound as it helps me transition between each section. So now moving on to group D, this is going to be like my bridge section. It pretty much mimics group B. The only exception is that there is a high pass filter and a flanger again. So group E would be the last group for this routine, and it's the sample slowed down with some reverb, and for continuity's sake, the flanger. And the last sound would be this crash cymbal. I have it linked to my sample, so they both trigger at the same time. So you just go to pad mode. Next to where you have your choke groups, you'll be able to select what pads you want linked together. And now every time I hit that sample pad, the crash will trigger as well. So now a brief glimpse of the master section of this project. So I have a compressor on here to tighten up the transients and glue together some of the dynamics of the beat. I also have Gullfoss, which is a smart EQ. It helps with recovering and taming some of those frequencies, followed by everyone's favorite RC20 retro color. And lastly, I use Machine's limiter to give it a little bit of a volume boost. Closing it out here, guys, I'm going to leave you with a performance of the routine that we just went through. And if this is a video that brought value to you, please hit that thumbs up button. If you want to see more content like this, please subscribe.